Get out of the kitchen, Dad. You're making everyone uncomfortable. My son-in-law said it loud enough for every person at my Thanksgiving table to hear. He said it like I was a dog that had wandered in from outside, like I hadn't owned this house for 22 years, like I hadn't spent the last 3 days cooking every single dish on that table. Before we go any further, please subscribe to the channel and drop a comment telling me what time it is where you're watching from right now. The cornbread had been in the oven since 6 that morning. I remember standing at the counter in the dark, measuring buttermilk by feel because I didn't want to wake anyone. 31 years of Thanksgiving mornings had taught my hands how to do it without thinking. The house smelled like sage and butter and the kind of warmth that takes decades to build into walls. My wife Donna would have loved this morning. She passed in 2019 just before everything changed. Before the phone call started. The house is mine. Paid off in 2004. 3 bedrooms, a big backyard in Naperville, Illinois, the kind of neighborhood where people still wave from driveways. I'd worked 34 years as a claims adjuster for Midwestern Mutual Insurance. Retired at 62 with a pension, a meticulous filing system, and the habit of documenting everything. Donna always said I treated life like a case file. She wasn't wrong. My daughter called me on a Tuesday evening in October 2 years ago. I was watching the Cubs game, not really watching it, just having the company of the noise. Dad, we're in trouble. Preston's restaurant. It's gone. Preston had opened Ember and Oak in Wicker Park 4 years earlier. Craft cocktails, farm to table, the whole thing. It had done well until it hadn't. A combination of bad timing, an expensive lease renewal, and a business partner who'd been skimming from the register for 18 months. By the time my daughter Leaf found out, the accounts were empty and the partner had relocated to somewhere without an extradition arrangement. We have nowhere to go, she said, just until we figure things out. Come home, I told her. Stay as long as you need. They arrived that Friday. My daughter Preston and my 13-year-old granddaughter, Marisol. 3 suitcases, a duffel bag, and the hollow look of people who'd been running on adrenaline for weeks and had just stopped. Leigh held me in the kitchen doorway for a long time without saying anything. Thank you, Dad. We'll be out of your hair before spring. Preston shook my hand. His grip was firm in the way that men grip hands when they're ashamed. You're saving our lives, Frank. I mean it. I told him not to worry about it. I told him family takes care of family. That was true when I said it. The first 6 months were fine. Difficult, the way any adjustment is difficult, but fine. I gave them the master bedroom since it was bigger, took the smaller room for myself. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself a lot of things that year. It was around month 7 that I noticed the shift. Small things at first. I'd come downstairs to find the living room rearranged. The chair my wife had picked out moved against the wall. The lamp she'd loved relegated to a corner. When I mentioned it, Preston shrugged. It flows better this way. More space for Marisol to do homework. I let it go. I let the remote control situation go. I let the refrigerator being restocked with food I hadn't bought go. I let the Sunday mornings where I'd come down to find Preston's friends already in my kitchen, drinking my coffee, go. What I couldn't let go was the money. Not because I'm a hard man, but because the numbers kept adding up and nobody else seemed to be counting. I'm an insurance man. I kept records. Month 4, I'd written a check for $18,000. Preston owed it to his former landlord, or they were going to pursue a personal judgment. Lee called me crying at 11 at night. I wrote the check the next morning. Month 9, another 12,000. Legal fees for the business dissolution. A firm downtown that didn't work on payment plans. Beyond that, the living expenses. My electric bill doubled. My grocery spending tripled. I was feeding 4 people, running a household for 4, on a budget I'd set for 1. I kept a ledger in my filing cabinet. Blue ink, every entry dated. Donna had bought me that ledger at an office supply store in 1997. I'd used it ever since. By the time Thanksgiving came around, 2 years in, I documented just over $61,000. Not 1 cent had come back. I want to be fair here. The first year there were promises. Preston talked constantly about his next project: a food truck, a catering company, a consulting arrangement with a hotel group downtown. Each idea arrived with energy and left without traction. By the second year, it stopped mentioning timelines. What changed was harder to describe. It happened gradually, then all at once. The way Preston talked to me in my own home, not rude exactly, not at first, just a particular kind of dismissiveness. The way you talk to someone whose opinion doesn't quite count. He started referring to the house as our place. Not to me, but I'd hear it when he was on the phone. Yeah, we've got plenty of room at our place. Come over whenever. Our place. I'd refinished the floors in that house with my own hands. I'd replaced the water heater, repainted every room, planted the oak tree in the backyard that was now taller than the fence. For 30 years, that house had been the physical evidence of everything I'd worked for. Now it was our place. Leigh stopped meeting my eyes around month 15. Not out of cruelty. Out of guilt, I think. She knew what was happening and couldn't figure out how to stop it without losing her marriage or her father. So she chose to look at the floor. The week before Thanksgiving, Preston told me he'd invited 8 people for the holiday. Friends of his, mostly. His college roommate, a couple from his restaurant days, a few others. He told me, didn't ask. I was already planning to cook. I always cooked on Thanksgiving. Donna and I had hosted every year since we'd moved in. It was the one holiday I never outsourced, never abbreviated. 22 years of Thanksgiving mornings in that kitchen. I said, fine. The more the merrier. I spent 3 days cooking. Turkey, brined overnight. Sweet potato casserole. From Donna's recipe card, the one written in her handwriting that I kept laminated in the kitchen drawer. Green bean casserole. Mashed potatoes. Cranberry relish from scratch. 2 pies. I was up at 5:30 Thanksgiving morning. The house was dark and cold, and mine in the way it only is before anyone else wakes up. By noon, people were arriving. I stood in the kitchen, still in my apron, listening to Preston in the entryway. Welcome, welcome. Let me show you around. Yeah, we've done some updates since we moved in. Leigh made that wreath on the door. Isn't it great? I walked into the hallway to introduce myself. Preston's arm went around his college roommate's shoulders, steering him toward the living room. That's Leigh's dad. He's been staying here with us. Good guy. Comes with the house. Comes with the house. I went back to the kitchen. Marisol found me there 10 minutes later, sitting at the table with a dish towel in my hands, not doing anything with it. Grandpa, she sat down across from me. She was 13 and already understood more than she should have had to. Why don't you say something? I looked at my granddaughter. She had Donna's eyes. That particular shade of brown that looks amber in certain light. Some things need to say themselves, I told her. She didn't look convinced. That's not fair to you. No. But it's the truth. I carried the turkey out on the platter at 2 o'clock. Every head turned. 22-pound bird, golden, perfect. 6 hours of my morning on that platter. Preston stood at the head of the table, my table. The table I'd bought at an estate sale in 2001, and sanded down and restrained myself, and accepted the compliments with the ease of a man who had earned them. Man, this looks unbelievable. You've outdone yourself, Preston. He nodded modestly. We wanted to do it right. I set the platter down. There was no seat for me. 12 chairs, 12 people, none of them left for the man who had cooked the meal, owned the table, owned the house, owned every dish the food was sitting on. I stood at the edge of my own dining room. I pulled out the chair at the head of the table. My chair. The one I'd sat in for 22 years. The wood was familiar under my hand. I knew every groove of it. Preston's head snapped up. He stood, both palms flat on the table. The glasses shook. Get out of the kitchen, Dad. He said it loudly, clearly, making sure the room heard. You're making everyone uncomfortable. This is our family's dinner. Go find somewhere to sit or go take a walk. Adults are celebrating here. The room went silent. 8 guests, people I had never met, sitting at my table eating my food in my house. I straightened up slowly. Preston. My voice was quiet. Whose house is this? Ila, the performative kind for the audience. Come on, don't do this right now. I want you to answer the question. Whose house is this? His face went red. You're embarrassing yourself. I looked at my daughter. She was staring at her plate. Her jaw was tight. She knew what was happening and she couldn't make herself stop it. Something settled in me right then. Not anger, not humiliation, clarity. The kind that comes after you've been patient for a very long time and realize the patience has been mistaken for weakness. I set my napkin on the table, folded it, set it beside my empty plate. I walked to the front closet, took out my coat, put it on. Then I walked to the door, opened it, and turned around. Everyone in this house who is not the owner of this house has 5 minutes to gather their things. This is my home. I purchased it in 2002. I am the sole person on the deed. Preston, Lee, take what you can carry and leave now. The rest of you, I am sorry your Thanksgiving was interrupted. You are welcome to take food with you. Preston laughed. He actually laughed. You're bluffing, old man. Sit down. His guests were already reaching for their coats. Hey, man, we should probably... Preston's roommate stood, hand on Preston's shoulder. Don't. He's joking. Sit down. But they didn't sit down. They filed out with the particular speed of people who understand a family situation when they're in the middle of one and want no part of it. Apologies, mumbled goodbyes. Someone grabbed a dinner roll on the way to the door. 80 seconds and they were gone. Then it was just the four of us. Preston stood at the table, still holding his wine glass, his confidence finally cracking at the edges. You cannot do this. We live here. We have rights. You have been guests. I'm revoking that. Leigh spoke for the first time. Her voice was very small. Dad, please. It's Thanksgiving. I know what day it is. I've been up since 5:30 cooking. We have nowhere to go. That is a problem you created, not me. I pulled out my phone. Preston watched. His wine glass was very still in his hand. What are you doing? Calling the non-emergency police line to ask for an officer to stand by while you collect your belongings. I am not calling 911. Nobody is in danger. But I am asking you to leave and I am documenting that request. You wouldn't. I died. I've known the Napadal non-emergency number for years. Former insurance professional in a mid-sized suburb. You accumulate useful numbers. It rang twice. Naperville Police, non-emergency. Yes, this is Frank Dolan. I'm at 1847 Birchwood Circle. I'm the homeowner. I have guests who are refusing to leave after being asked to go. No immediate danger. I'd like an officer to come by. We can have someone there in about 20 minutes, Mr. Dolan. Thank you. I'll stay on the line. Preston set his wine glass down. Gently, the confidence didn't rain from his face all at once. It went in stages, like a tide. Leigh's hands came up to her mouth. Marisol slipped off her chair and came to stand beside me, not saying anything, just standing there. 13 years old and more backbone than anyone else in that room. 20 minutes later, a squad car pulled up. Officer Torres, calm and professional, reviewed my deed, my ID, confirmed the situation. Preston attempted the tenant rights argument. Officer Torres explained Illinois law with the patience of someone who'd explained it many times before. No lease, no rent paid, no tenancy. I was the sole owner. They needed to leave. They gathered what they could carry. Lee was crying in a way that was hard to watch, the kind of crying that's been building for a long time. Preston's jaw was set, his movements mechanical, a man in shock. As he passed me in the doorway, Preston leaned close. You'll regret this. You just threw your own family out on Thanksgiving. I regret the years I spent letting you mistake my generosity for permission. He left. The door closed. I stood in my hallway for a long moment. Then I went to the kitchen, covered the food, and sat down in the chair at my table, the one that had always been mine. The house was very quiet. That night was strange. I slept, which surprised me. I woke up at 6 to a house that was entirely mine again and didn't know quite what to do with the feeling. I changed the locks that morning. Tony's Hardware on 5th Avenue opened at 7:30. I called a locksmith by 8, new deadbolts on the front and back doors. I kept 2 keys, one on my keychain, one in the fireproof safe in the bedroom closet. Then I sat down with my ledger. 34 years of insurance work taught me this. You don't know what something costs until you add it all up. I went through every entry. The check register, the utility bills I'd saved, the grocery receipts I'd photographed, the wire transfers. I had a folder on my computer labeled simply expenses, current residence that I'd been adding to since month 2. Donna had been right about me and case files. Final tally, $61,420. Documented. Dated. Receipts attached. Lay called the next morning. I let it ring, then listened to the voicemail. Dad. She'd been crying for a while before the call. Please, it's freezing. We're at a holiday inn off the interstate. Marisol doesn't understand what's happening. Please just let us come back and we can talk about it. This isn't you. This isn't how our family does things. I listened to it twice. Then I called my neighbor Ed, who'd been a family law attorney before he retired. Ed had watched my tulips when Donna was in the hospital. He'd sat with me the night she died, just sat there, and we hadn't needed to say much. He came over that afternoon with his thermos of coffee and listened to everything without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. You did everything right, Frank. Legally, you're on solid ground. Why do I feel like I did something terrible? Because you love your daughter, and because you've been absorbing her choices for 2 years, and this is the first time the cost landed somewhere visible. He refilled his cup. But Frank, be ready. When people get cornered financially and emotionally, they get creative. What do you mean? Alimony, implied tenancy, unjust enrichment. Preston is going to look for any lever he can find. Do you have documentation of everything? In a filing cabinet in my office. Labs by month. Ed almost smiled. Of course it is, he stood. Get an attorney. Not when they sue. Now, get ahead of it. I know someone at Glenview Family Law. Her name is Susan Hartley. Straight shooter, sharp as they come. Call her Monday. I called Monday. Susan Hartley had a voice like someone who'd heard every version of every story and was still paying attention. She told me to bring everything. I brought everything. 3 manila folders, tabbed by category, bank statements with highlighted entries, printed email chains where Preston had thanked me for covering expenses in writing, in several cases explicitly calling the house my house and calling the money help, not investment. One email from Lee, 14 months in. Thanks for covering the electric again, Dad. We'll pay you back once Preston's catering idea gets going. Susan looked up from the folder. She told them it was help, not investment. He called it a loan in at least 4 separate emails. She nodded slowly. He is going to have a very hard time claiming ownership of anything. 2 weeks later, the certified letter arrived. Preston had found an attorney, a man named Garvey out of Wheaton who specialized in real estate disputes and had a website that described him as aggressive and results-driven. The complaint alleged implied tenancy, financial contribution to property maintenance, and something called promissory estoppel, which is a legal theory that means roughly, you made a promise and I relied on it to my detriment. I read it on my back porch with a cup of coffee. Then I called Susan. Get the counter complaint ready, I told her. Already drafting it. Preston had made one miscalculation that turned out to be significant. About 8 months into living at my house, he'd been involved in a dispute with his former catering supplier. An invoice discrepancy. In the course of arguing about it, he'd sent the supplier an email claiming he was currently living rent-free with family while he rebuilt, explicitly stating he had no financial obligation toward the property. Susan found that email in Discovery. It was 6 sentences long, and it demolished his tenancy argument entirely. The hearing was set for February, Cook County Circuit Court, Domestic Division. I drove myself downtown on a gray Tuesday morning, parked in the garage at Clark and Washington, walked 2 blocks to the Daily Center. Security, elevators, 4th floor. Room 4 and 7. Preston sat across the aisle with Garvey. He'd gotten a haircut. New tie. He looked like he was auditioning for something. Lee sat beside him, not looking at anyone. Marisol wasn't there. I was glad for that. Judge Calloway was a man in his late 60s, grey mustache, reading glasses that he kept taking on and off. He had the demeanor of someone who'd stopped being surprised by family disputes around 2003. He read both filings. Then he read Preston's email to the catering supplier. He read it twice, without expression, and set it down. Counsel. He looked at Garvey. Your client explicitly states in writing that he has no financial obligation to this property and is living rent-free as a guest of family. How does that support a tenancy claim? Garvey began explaining the theory of implied tenancy through conduct. Judge Calloway let him finish. Then he said, "Motion to dismiss, granted. Mr. Sterling, the court finds no basis for a tenancy claim. You are a guest of the homeowner. The homeowner has asked you to leave. That request was lawful. These proceedings are concluded." He didn't even recess for deliberation. Start to finish, the hearing lasted 19 minutes. In the hallway afterward, Preston turned toward me. Garvey put a hand on his arm. "Don't," his own attorney told him. Leigh walked past without looking at me. I watched her go and felt the particular ache of a thing that can't be undone quickly. I drove home through the grey February morning, thinking about the ledger on my desk. $61,420. A court victory was one thing, but the number was still there, real and documented, and I'd spent 34 years believing that documentation existed for a reason. Susan filed the civil recovery complaint the following week. $61,000 itemized. Preston received his summons at the apartment they'd rented in Elgin. Lee received hers at the same address. Leigh called that evening. "Dad." Her voice had changed. The desperation was gone. What was left was something quieter and harder to read. "Why?" "Because you borrowed $61,000 and I have it in writing. We can't pay that. The court will set a schedule." A long pause. "I'm sorry," she finally said. Not the panicked kind of sorry from the Holiday Inn parking lot. This was different. Slower. "I let him do it. I knew what was happening to you, and I let it keep happening because it was easier than fighting with him. That's on me. Not just on him." She stopped. "That's all I wanted to say." I held the phone for a moment. "I know," I said. "And I heard it." The civil judgment came in April. Judge Calloway presided again, as luck had it. He reviewed the documentation with the thoroughness of a man who appreciated organized paperwork. Judgment for plaintiff, $61,000. Given defendant's current financial status, payment terms of $400 per month, jointly and severally. Total repayment period approximately 12.5 years. Court costs split between defendants. Preston's jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. Leigh nodded. Once, like someone accepting a sentence they'd known was coming. In the lobby afterward, Marisol appeared. I hadn't seen her since Thanksgiving. She was taller somehow, or maybe just carrying herself differently. She crossed the lobby and hugged me without saying anything first. "I'm sorry, Grandpa," she said it into my shoulder. "You have nothing to be sorry about." "I know, but I am anyway." I held my granddaughter and looked over her head at the courthouse lobby, the marble floors, the people moving past, all their ordinary terrible Tuesdays, and I felt something that was not quite peace and not quite grief, but something in between. Something that had been a long time arriving. Leigh stood a few feet away. When Marisol stepped back, my daughter looked at me. I'd like to have coffee sometime, she said. When you're ready. No agenda. Just coffee. I thought about it. When you've made 3 months of payments, I said, then we'll have coffee. She nodded. That's fair. Preston had already walked out. I didn't watch him go. Ed came over that evening. We sat on my back porch, the same place we'd sat in November when I'd needed to talk to someone who would just listen. The yard was coming back, the way Illinois yards come back in April, slowly and with effort, but coming. He had his thermos, I had mine. How do you feel? He asked. Like someone finished building something and isn't sure yet if it's the right shape. He nodded, watching the yard. Donna would have handled all of this differently. She would have caught it earlier, I said. She always saw people more clearly than I did. That's not an insult to you. I know. It's just true. We sat for a while. An oak tree in the corner of the yard was budding. I'd planted it 15 years ago, and there were years when I'd wondered if it would take. It had taken. Sometimes things do. Leigh made her first payment on May 1st. $200, her half. Automatic transfer, right on time. I logged it in the ledger in blue ink. Same ledger, same cabinet. The habit of documentation doesn't change because the subject does. I sat at the kitchen table after logging it and looked out at the backyard. The oak tree, the fence I'd painted 3 times, the garden bed where Donna used to grow tomatoes and where I'd grown nothing since she passed. Maybe this summer, I thought. Maybe tomatoes again. Marisol texted me that weekend. Just a photo. Her school production of something in costume, grinning the way kids grin when they've done something they're proud of. No caption. Didn't need one. I texted back, you look wonderful. Save me a seat next time. 3 dots. Then, always Grandpa. I set the phone down on the kitchen table in my house, in the quiet of a Saturday morning that belonged entirely to me, and decided that was enough for now. That this was what the long game looked like when you finally reached the end of it. Not a triumph, just yours again. Just steady. Just real. If this story stayed with you, please subscribe to Sincere Revenge Stories and share your thoughts in the comments. To hear the next story, click the box to the left. Thank you for listening. I've been thinking a lot lately about the moment I folded that napkin. Such a small thing. The turkey was still hot on the table. 8 people I didn't know were sitting in my chairs, eating food I'd been cooking since before sunrise. And I just folded the napkin, set it down, and stood up. Something in me had finally gotten quiet enough to act. People ask why I waited so long. 2 years is a long time to absorb something. And honestly, I don't have a clean answer. Part of it was love. Part of it was guilt. The particular guilt of a parent who wonders if they failed somewhere along the way and keeps trying to make up for it. Part of it was that I kept hoping the people I loved would find their way back to decency on their own. They didn't. And eventually, I had to reckon with the fact that my patience wasn't helping anyone. It was just making it easier for the wrong things to continue. What I know now is this. There's a difference between being a good person and being a doormat. And the line between them is whether you're willing to stand behind what you know is right when it costs you something. Doing the right thing when it's comfortable isn't character. Character is what you find out about yourself when the comfortable option is to stay quiet, to let it go one more time, to tell yourself it'll get better. I let it go for 2 years. I don't regret giving Leigh and Preston the chance to turn things around on their own. I regret that I confused endurance with generosity. The ledger mattered. I kept records not because I was planning a lawsuit from month 2, but because I'd spent 34 years in a profession that taught me the world runs on documentation. What I didn't expect was that those blue ink entries would end up being the most honest record of what actually happened in my home. Numbers don't perform. They don't make excuses. $61,420 is exactly what it says it is. And when I sat across from Susan Hartley and slid those folders across her desk, I wasn't being vindictive. I was being precise. There's a kind of intelligence in that, in knowing what you know and being able to show it clearly. I earned that the hard way over a long career. And it turned out to be one of the most useful things I owned. What Maricel said in that courthouse lobby stayed with me. She said she was sorry, and I told her she had nothing to apologize for. But the part I keep returning to is what she said after. She said she understood why I did it. She said she understood why I did it. She said it showed her what standing up for yourself looks like. I hope that's true. I hope she carries that somewhere useful. Because I think about the version of this story where I didn't fold the napkin, where I went to the kitchen like Preston told me to, where I swallowed it one more time. That version doesn't end better for anyone, least of all Marisol. She would have learned that patience is the same as permission. It isn't. Patience is a choice you make every day with your eyes open. The day I stopped choosing it was the day I finally did something worth teaching. The oak tree in the backyard is blooming this spring. I planted it 15 years ago, and there were years I wasn't sure it would hold. It held. Some things do, if you give them the right conditions and leave them alone to grow. That's not a metaphor I planned. It's just what I saw from my kitchen window this morning in my house, drinking my coffee on a quiet Tuesday that belonged entirely to me.